Welcome to the Jack Westin MCAT podcast with your hosts, Michael Maleka
and Molly Hudash. Hello, everyone, and welcome back with another episode of the Jack Westin MCAT podcast with your hosts, Mike and Molly. Mike, we had so much fun over the past couple weeks talking all things content. And I think we've heard you guys in your suggestions for us and the things that you really want to see here. And I think we're ready to make a small adjustment in planning our future episodes, right?
100%.
What are we talking about?
100%. I mean, I think in reflecting on all that great stuff we covered, how many months were we where we're just going through like 3,
I think it was like
4
at
months?
least 12 or 13 episodes.
Yeah, so like 3,
One a
like
week,
3, yeah, 4
3
maybe months. Yeah.
We were on a content binge.
We were on a content binge. Again, our goal was to cover some of the most high yield concepts, and not only the most difficult concepts on the MCAT, the ones that through our experience students have historically struggled with. But in hearing you guys again, we talk with you, we hear you, we notice, right? There's one thing that we constantly hear, we want to hear more talk, that people want us to talk about more, which is probably the most high yield thing on the MCAT. Probably the most high yield thing on the MCAT, which is strategy. We are talking strategy. We're gonna be adding way more strategy kind of going forward and starting today, starting this episode, because arguably, we always talk about this exam is not a content exam. And we talk about this all the time, Molly. I mean, content's foundational. Don't get me wrong. It's not. I don't want anybody hearing that thing. Mike is saying,
"Oh, I don't need content
need
anymore."
content. All right, I'm just gonna not do content anymore. No, that is not what I'm saying. It's foundational. But if we were to talk about what percentage of your success actually is attributed to content, Molly, what would you say that is?
Okay, so I think it's hard because content is like a prerequisite, and I'm laughing because I just thought about it as it's necessary, but it's not sufficient for success on the MCAT.
Wow,
in the context of science, right? To be necessary is that if you don't have it, that process will not occur, right? So if you don't have any content knowledge, you probably, all statistical likelihood, you will not succeed on this test, right? It's a requirement. However, to be sufficient means if I just do that, is that enough to get that outcome or to kickstart that process? And the answer is no. Okay, so just having the content is not enough to be successful. Not having any content is a pretty good way to not achieve success. So it is necessary, it's foundational, it is a prerequisite for success. And again, part of our goal of the past couple weeks and months was to help get you to that foundational threshold of these are the topics that will show up. You need to know them, you need to understand them. But just because you know them and understand them does not mean that you're ready to get a 528, right? You really have to get to know the exam that you're taking, right? Every time you take a full length, ultimately there are so many other skills that are being tested at that same time that content is being tested. Again, it's passage reading comprehension, which in itself is a skill. And even that skill looks different in the different science or CARS sections, right? So it's a lot of skills involved in just passage reading, reading comprehension, data interpretation. You then have your question approach strategies and rephrasing and process of elimination and all of those things. You have content, you've got reasoning that's being evaluated. You also have endurance, how long can you focus for, and time management. Okay, so content is really important. We're not trying to undermine the value of content. However, a lot of us coming out of undergrad or coming back into studying, if you're non-traditional, we are conditioned to, kind of
prioritize that. That's the whole thing. Yeah.
And if I just have the information, I'll do well. And really, that's just one little piece of the MCAT puzzle. So I'm really excited. This new sort of segment series, we're going to be doing some strategy and some content, some learning. We're going to be bouncing back between them so that no matter whether you're testing still in 2025 and you're really ramping up with exams, you need a lot of strategy, maybe a couple high yield content, episodes, or if you're testing in 2026 and you've got months, right, you're still getting both sides of that coin. So I'm really, really excited because ultimately you can't succeed on the MCAT without at least a foundational level of content and some pretty strong strategies.
Right. Right. And I think we see all the time, like I talk to students all the time who are, are just getting introduced to the JW family in the community. And to
Mhm.
talk about like what their plan is, like if I see students struggling all the time, and one of the most common things is what you mentioned before, how a lot
Focusing
of
on
students are
content
just
the whole time.
hoarding content the whole
Yeah.
time. They're like, I've been studying content for 3 months and I'm still not doing well on my passages. I'm like, okay, what's your passage strategy? And they're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, we know
Or
where we need to
or how many passages are you doing? Like one a week? Like,
one a week. I'm
okay,
like, oh,
that's the problem.
like that's what we know what we need to start doing, right? We see
Yeah.
so many kind of again, I hesitate to say, but mistakes when it comes to
So many
um
pitfalls.
right, that or that yeah, pitfalls maybe that students fall into when tackling specifically science passages and the science content. And I kind of wanted to just start with like the mistakes that we see, because if you resonate with any of the mistakes that we're about to or pitfalls that we talk about, this episode is for you. If
Yeah.
you hear anything like, wow, I do that, I struggle with that, let's start. Let's start.
Yeah.
And I think a great place to start is something that we talk about all the time, you and me, Molly, which is
Hmm.
memorizing. Oh my
Yes.
goodness. I again we if you're new to the episode to this podcast, welcome. But if you're a long time listener, you know throughout our series, throughout we talk about intentionally learning everything.
Hmm.
Not memorizing our info, like not memorizing all the things. There are some things you need to memorize, but to understand our
Yeah.
content, not only just for that's good to do, but also for application. I always say that here's like a really great like litmus test to know if a student's memorized. This is my litmus test. This is a question I always ask is if you are a student that you do a question when you're doing your practice problems and you struggle with the questions, but then when you look at the solution, you're like, oh, it was so obvious.
Uh-huh.
If you are constantly like, and I talk to students and they're like, oh, that's so me all the time. And someone listening to this, it's like, yeah, if you struggle with the questions and then when you look at the solution, oh, it's just an
Like
equation we're supposed to use. Oh, it was just so obvious, silly
silly
mistake.
mistake.
Oh my goodness. No, it is not a silly mistake. The
Yeah.
problem was when you saw it, you recognized it because you've been memorizing. But the reason you keep on not being able to apply it is because you memorized in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And so, in order to fix that, one, we have to start going back on their content, but we also have to start using questions or strategy in general so that we can what's the word I'm looking for? Intentionally apply the information that you already have to our passages, to our questions. And so the first mistake when reading science passages is not only memorizing your content, but also trying to memorize what's in the passage itself, right?
Yeah.
If you feel like, oh, I have to make sure I keep everything in the passage of mind. So memorizing is our like big no-no on this, in this whole prep. You don't memorize your content, but you also don't need to memorize the passage. You can always go back. Always, always, always. Yet we always feel like I'm getting so overwhelmed with all this information. Don't try to memorize the content in the passage, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're going to see this with science and cars. Obviously, today's episode is all about reading science passages.
Mhm.
I don't think that we've said that yet.
Oh yeah,
It's all
I
about
think
reading
that
science
if you clicked on the
passages.
title, you know where you're coming in today. But yes.
So that's a note about
Mhm.
science content and also science passages. And I feel like
Mhm.
it's important as we frame
Mhm.
this discussion about science passages to
Mhm.
talk about how things are different, right? A
Mhm.
science passage is going to give you a brand new scenario. It's
Mhm.
meant to give you stuff that you've never seen.
Mhm.
I've seen students, especially students that are brand new to the MCAT, they see those passages and they're like, oh my God, I have so much to learn. I need to
Mhm.
memorize all this information.
Mhm.
I like this is content I should know.
Mhm.
No, to be super
Mhm.
clear, right?
Mhm.
We all hopefully have seen a Cars passage before and felt that feeling of like, I have no idea what's going on. I
Mhm.
didn't learn about, this
Mhm.
this interesting Irish poem. Was I supposed to know
Cool.
this? Obviously not. A lot of science is like that. Okay, you're going to get a
Mhm.
lot of stuff that you've never seen before, except now it will connect to your content that you've learned.
Mhm.
Okay, so you are not expected to know the surface level happenings of the
Mhm.
passage, but you are expected to be able to connect what you've learned to that new scenario.
Mhm.
Okay, so you're going to see a lot of new terms and concepts and molecules and relationships and structures. You are not expected to know those things, but also memorizing them will not help you.
Mhm.
Okay, because they're giving you so much new information, what they're trying to see is can you read through without getting lost in the details? And then
Mhm.
can you figure out how best to reference that material when you get to the questions?
Mhm.
Okay, so we don't want to be trying to memorize every fact, figure, detail. We also don't want to paint the whole passage yellow in terms of our
Don't get me started on
highlights,
that. Yeah. Mhm.
right? Because ultimately, like, it's fine to highlight in science. You could go back to the passage. You're meant to go back to the passage. But a sea of yellow, right? Every sentence or term in the passage is highlighted. That's not going to be helpful either.
Yeah.
That's hard to go back. So as we're reading, if you want to jot down a quick note or you want to use a highlight, you're welcome to, but just be intentional, because I know through the lens of let's just memorize, we want to take note of every single thing that's there. And you're going to have a ton of new, very specific information in these science passages. So really what we're trying to do is get through it, figure out what is mentioned and where it's mentioned, and be ready to go back if you need, right? You can take notes. You do have scratch paper. You're absolutely welcome to do that. But
actually, it looks kind of like, if you're for any of our video watchers, it looks actually just like this.
yeah,
Right? You see the title that we just wrote? Yes, it looks like this. All right.
Yes.
They give you this for a reason.
yes. So one of the things that we see a lot is, trying to memorize things and feeling like you need to, but also filling that paper up with every
All the-
single fact, figure, and detail that's in the passage, like basically taking notes like this is a college lecture, or painting the whole passage yellow in terms of highlighting.
Right.
None of those are particularly beneficial, even though they are things that everyone either does now or did at one point.
At some point. And I think this is kind of a Goldilocks zone situation, because there is such thing as like highlighting too much and writing too much, like we just talked about before. But there's also other end of the spectrum, which we both know very well, which is
Just
where
enough.
people just there's a just right zone, but there's also all the way on the other end where it's like people skip the passage and skip the figures and then first go to the questions. Okay, I've seen this so often. I hear all the time. We do a science like science passage strategy session in our free trial sessions. Highly recommend to join. I always poll. It's like, who here goes to the questions first and then before going to actually reading the passage. And it's like, I swear, like a third or a half of the class says yes, I do. And I get it, right? Anyone listening, there's somebody listening who does this, probably many people. I get the reasoning behind it, right? Where the argument is, oh, what if the questions don't need the passage? Or what if I can do it without the passage? My counterpoint is, how do you know? How do you know that this question does or doesn't need the passage if you don't even know what's in the passage, right? So many times, and again, I'm going to be talking to someone here where you thought this was a question that just needed your content because you're like, oh, this is just a content question, when, oh, the passage actually just had a very clear point about this one piece of information, or the passage brought up contradictory information to your content. Happens all the time. All the time, but because you did not read the passage, you did not know that counterpoint that they just presented, right? So you went on your own content and, oh, got the question wrong. Or it's about figures, right? Where maybe you do read the passage, but then you skip the figures, right? Where, oh, because I'm just going to look at the figure if the question's asking me about it. But then I always ask, do they owe you that they're going to say, look at this figure? Sometimes they do, but they don't have to. You won't imagine the amount of times I'm sitting with a student going over their exams, and they're like, oh, I had no idea where to find this information. And I'm like, oh, that was from the figure. And they're like, oh, where did it say that in the question? And I was like, they didn't owe you that. They didn't have to say in the question that, oh, hey, look at the figure. Sometimes they do, but they don't have to. So there is a taking too many notes and highlighting and kind of getting stuck on every detail. But there's also, on the other spectrum, you don't want to just skip anything entirely. We don't skip the passage and we don't skip the figure, right? We read it intentionally, right? And we're going to be talking about how to read the passage very intentionally today. Like I have to actually take it apart. But there is a just right in the middle. So we don't skip figures. We do not skip the passage. I know I'm going to be making some people upset who are listening to this, because there's some people who swear by it. But again, we've seen this again for some people. Again, passage strategy isn't a one size fits all. Something I also like to preface. We use a strategy that we've seen work for hundreds of thousands of students. There are people who they do it their own way. Go for it. If that works for you, hallelujah, have fun. But for most people that we see, it does not work, right? So what we want to present is a way that we've seen work consistently with so many students today.
Yeah. And I think what's important to recognize is that, car strategy, which we will talk about eventually, really, really fun. We have some amazing car strategies here at Jack Weston, but Cars, every passage, even if the topic is different, you approach it exactly the same way.
Exactly the
right?
same.
It doesn't matter because you're in the same boat every time. You're looking for the author's arguments. You want to keep track of what those arguments are. You're not going to go back to the passage. Like it's a very one size fits all car strategy, whether you're talking about history or philosophy or government or ethics or whatever. Science, though, you have a lot of very different types of passages, right? Passages are going to look different if they're in Psych Soc versus Chem Phys versus Biochem. And even within those sections, there are so many different types of passages, different types of content, but also different structures. Is it a research-based passage? Is it a signaling cascade passage? Is it a, physics experimental setup? You have no idea, right? So what's really key is for science, what we need to do is develop a toolkit. These are the strategies I have at my disposal. And these are like the raw materials that I can use to approach every passage in question. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But I do want to just echo one thing that you've said before, which is that Goldilocks zone, right? And how many students, yes, overdo it with the passage, but also how many completely ignore it. And I want to acknowledge that that is a huge consequence of a memorization mindset. Like I've memorized all this material. I don't need the passage. The passage is going to distract me. I know the content. I want to get all the content questions. But like you said, sometimes and kind of often, honestly, you'd be surprised, they will present a special exception.
Right.
A time where what is going on in terms of the science is counterintuitive to the content that you've learned. They do that on purpose to see who's reading the passage. And I think we do it because we feel more confident in our content than our passage strategies. But as someone who took a very strategic approach to my own exam, it's the biggest help to be using your passage. If you have information from the passage or information from your brain that both could be useful for this question, default to the passage 100 times out of 100, right? Like the passage really is your best friend because there are so many clues in that passage about the types of questions that could be asked, the answers that are going to be right versus wrong. If you learn how to analyze the passage, as long as you have that foundational level of content, I don't mean you need to be a walking encyclopedia. You can get really, really far.
Right.
So
right.
I always like to out myself as someone who, when I took the MCAT, and I scored a 521, I did not know most of the content, right? Or I knew a lot of the content, but I was not a content expert, right? It's a 98th percentile score, but I didn't know 98% of the content of that was relevant to the test, like maybe 75 or 80%, if that, right? But I didn't need every tiny little detail because if I use what's given in the passage, I can pick the best of 4 options at a very high accuracy, right? You use the passage against the question. And that's the mindset that we want to be sharing here today. We're not going to talk a ton about the questions themselves, but how can we get out of the passage what we need to get that huge advantage when it comes to the questions? Again, how can we figure out what's going to be relevant? And then how can we use that to select the best out of 4 options instead of feeling like we need to be able to write a paragraph by hand about the answer to a question?
Yeah, no, you really don't. And
it's not a short answer.
It is. Thank God. I would, that would be a mess. Me personally, yes. And I think I always love, and I love that because like you have like this really great, like this happened for me, but we also see this for so many students that we work with. I remember it so vividly. There was this one young lady who she had like already been sitting for like 2 or 3 months, and she was struggling with bio, specifically bio. She had such a strong car score. Like she had like 128, 129 cars, but like 124 bio. She was struggling there. And she was like, I don't get it. Like, I don't understand. I know my content really well. And then when, okay, what's your strategy? She's like, yeah, I go with the questions and then I go back to read the passage. And I'm like, I can tell, like you have a strong car score. You can read a passage. You can digest information. Why don't we just start reading the bio passage with the same intentionality that you read a cars passage? Not the same strategy, but the same intention where you're going to read it to understand it.
Mhm.
Legitimately, I can't make this up. Like within 2 weeks, she was scoring 129s, 130s consistently in bio. Like
Sometimes that's what's
it was
missing.
shocking. Like genuinely, like I'm not gonna say her name because again, I don't want to out of there, but it was shocking how great it was. So again, I was thinking about that, and then so many other scenarios like that where it's like, let's just start reading the passage intentionally, which we're going to talk about today, and you'll be shocked at the kind of changes that are possible.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
always love, and just to clarify, we love as tutors and teachers who have been doing
Mhm.
this for years, we love the overnight successes. They are very rare.
Very rare, very
But
rare.
depending on how long you've been studying, right, this really might be what's
The
missing
thing.
for you in
Mhm.
your sciences. It depends
Mhm.
on every student. Again, this is what meeting with a tutor can really do for you.
Right,
But
right.
I love that. I love that you
Mhm.
bring that up. Those overnight successes really do stick with
Right.
you. And they're not
Right.
actually overnight success.
Mhm.
That was just months and months of work that was still held back by one
Thing.
strategic,
Mhm.
fallacy. We
Mhm.
fixed that one thing, and now the work that they've been doing for months was
Can
able to
now
shine through.
pay off,
Um,
right?
but I love that. So I
Mhm.
think at this point, let's talk about it. We've
Sure.
talked about things that we do that
Mhm.
maybe hold us back a little bit.
Mhm.
And we've talked about how valuable having this strategic toolkit can
Mhm.
be when we look at, actual performance
Right,
on
right.
full lengths and practice
Mhm.
passages. But let's talk about what some of those core strategies are going to look like. You
Mhm. Mhm.
mentioned we're going to read this not similar to cars, but in a way that mimics the intentionality. What do you
Mhm.
mean by that? Let's start there.
Of course. And I think this is like the step number one best practice, which is
Mhm.
we read slowly and carefully, always, but you can remember while you're reading, you can always refer back. I think this idea is so counterintuitive for a lot of people, where it's like,
Mhm.
I need to read, again, I know what people are thinking slowly and carefully. Don't you mean fast?
I
Because
don't have
I got
time
a
for that.
timer,
Yeah.
right? I got the time. And this is, again, I always quote the same line, which is like, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Which is to say that
Mhm.
when
I like
you
that.
yeah, it does. Yeah, I
I
love
don't
that
think I've heard
saying.
that
Yeah,
before.
slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Where it's like, if you read slowly and carefully, you are understanding as you're reading. One thing you're not doing is rereading constantly. And
Mhm.
so by reading slowly and carefully, just take your time as you're reading. You end up, it's shocking, you end up actually reading way faster than you
Faster.
otherwise would.
Yep.
Way, because you're not constantly confused reading back. Like, what am I reading? What am I confused? The stress hormones are right. And then you're like, oh, I understand that. Okay, let me keep going. Oh, that makes sense. I keep going. You read slowly and carefully. But again, I don't want you to feel like, oh, I have to memorize. I'm reading slowly and carefully. I don't have to write down every line. No, you're just understanding as you're reading. What are they presenting to you? What makes sense to you? Right? And if something doesn't make sense, okay, that's okay. Right? Again, we don't want to dwell on all the things we don't know. It's an experiment XRP1. You don't know have to know. We don't have to know what XRP1 is. Maybe just
Yeah.
focus on it's a kinase or something like that.
Uh-huh.
But again, we have to be looking for very specific things while we're reading, right? And
Hmm.
so this is one of the big do's of when we're reading the passage. We want to keep our eye out for what we call buzzwords and testable information, right?
Hmm.
Now you might be asking, what's a buzzword, right? Buzzwords are those sorts of words that cue up or kind of flare up a little connection in your brain of content that you've been studying, right? I always
Hmm.
like giving examples of buzzwords to illustrate that idea. You
Yeah.
see like an amino acid, right? Amino
Uh-huh.
acids. You see a phenylalanine,
Competitive inhibitor.
competitive inhibitor, phosphorylation. Oh, let's keep on going.
A
Genetic DNA,
capacitor.
chromatin, heterochromatin. Like you see
Role conflict.
right, oh yeah, and psych. So I always like yeah, role conflict or hey,
Amygdala.
you see ages, you see certain age ranges. Oh hey, I wonder what they might be testing on, right? We want to be as we're looking for in our passage, reading it carefully. You want to be like, kind of ready to see what's the testable information they're testing me here. What's reminding me of my content? Because here's a question I get all the time. All the time, it's like and someone here again. I'm always referring to the people who are listening. You've probably gone through a question and then you're like struggling, like, how am I supposed to think about this question? Then you look at the solution and you're like, oh, I understand how they thought that, but how was I supposed to know to think that? Like, I understand when I see it, but how was I supposed to know to think that way? A lot of times, the passage, that's the purpose of the passage, to prime us. They're like, how was I supposed to know to think of forces or energy for this question? Well, the whole passage was about forces and the relation to energy or something like that. And we kind of overlooked that because we got so drowned in the details. We didn't realize this is what they're really asking us about and how we're priming ourselves. And again, so many times, even with students that I currently work with, we're like, oh, how is I supposed to know think that way? Like, look at that buzzword that you highlighted. That buzzword should have primed you for this question. And so the goal of looking for those buzzwords, those key words, is to kind of anticipate what the questions are going to be about, right?
Yeah. And this actually prompts a very valuable psych-soc term and idea, which is called spreading activation. This is a term that you'll learn when you study psych-soc. If you haven't, right, write it down.
High yield stuff right here.
Write a definition. It's an idea when we talk about brain science where if you prime someone with a particular word or phrase or idea, all of the connected ideas that you have created, right, those neural connections are now much easier to activate. So like if I tell you an amino acid, glutamate, right, that is a word that you have learned, maybe not, if not, you will, amino acids, that then as soon as you say it is going to prompt, okay, well, I know the pKa of its side chain. I know this is amino acid. I know that it's acidic. I know that it can be, negatively charged at physiological pH. I know this and this about it. I know it's phosphomymetic, right? Like
that was one of the first things that came to my mind is like phosphomymetic, and someone's like listening to that and they're like, what? And they're like, that's how used to we are, like that priming. You say the glutamate or aspartate, I'm like phosphomimetic. What's it replacing, kind of deal.
Which this is all content, of course, but what I want to demonstrate here is the spreading activation. If I said table, right, to give a non-MCAT relevant example, if I said table, you might think chair or wood or tablecloth or kitchen or dining room or sitting or dinner, like food, family. Like I say one thing and it prompts you to think of all these other things. That's exactly what you're doing while you read science, okay? You're gonna have a bunch of those words that are gonna trigger these mental maps that you have and you've created during your content review. And that is exactly what we want you to be doing. That's why you read slow and read carefully. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. I like it. Yeah, and then, if it's an actual word itself, that's great. But also sometimes you get information that's not just one word. It's testable, but how do we know that? So to give you kind of a concrete definition for information that's testable or critical for understanding, it's going to be stuff that is new to you and specific enough to ask a question about. Okay, if I say, the Ebola virus ravages Africa, they're not going to give you a question of like what country is or what continent is most affected by Ebola. Like that's not an MCAT
question.
It's not specific enough to ask a question about. But if they then start to go into the virus itself, the structure, how it enters the cell, et cetera, like that is testable. That is now very specific. If we get into specific, proteins that help facilitate entry, or what, the cell surface looks like for the host cell and how that involves, a viral entry, et cetera. That is now very testable. So examples of things that are specific enough to be testable and that are new, right? If they give us any sort of values with units, you get, a resistor, and it tells you exactly what the resistance is, or if they tell you that there is a 10 Newton force, or something is moving at 10 meters per second, or a concentration of 1 molar, right? Like any sort of value with units is pretty useful because it opens the door for calculations. Okay, so those are really nice. I always highlight them, especially because they're short and sweet.
Yeah.
Again, you don't want to overdo it on the highlights, but for things that are a number with a unit, or if it's a term like a buzzword, go ahead and highlight.
Those.
Any sort of relationship is also really valuable. It depends on the way that it's phrased.
Right.
If it's like, protein X inhibits protein Y. Okay, that's pretty short and sweet. If you want to highlight it, you're welcome to. But personally, when we get into really complex relationships, I would rather use my scratch paper for that.
Right.
But it depends. If it said protein X is a competitive inhibitor, that's a buzzword and a relationship. So you can highlight, do whatever you want with it. Any sort of experimental information, if they tell you what your variables are, if they tell you what a trend is, what their research question is, we'll actually talk a little bit later in this episode on how to deal with experiments and research in sciences, and especially how to get to those trends because they're so high yield. But those can be very important. any background knowledge that might not be said directly, but is like being described. This is very common in psych soc.
Super. I'm like that's a very psych soc, yeah.
It's very psych soc. Like they'll give you an example of a mother who's also a doctor and how the competing, you know, like
Or
roles that
conflicting roles.
yeah, are conflicting and how her responsibilities or role as a doctor and responsibilities as a mother might be in conflict with each other. They're not going to use that exact
Role
word.
conflict. Yeah,
But
you're
if
not gonna
they
say role.
say that and you have two roles that are in conflict, that's role conflict,
By
right? Like
definition,
they're giving you this probably big long paragraph that is painting a picture of, I know exactly what term this is,
Right.
jot it down, right? They're going to ask you about that.
Right.
If they allude to something, it's going to be questions.
I love how we're like that's super psych. So it's like chem and bio, like it
yeah.
can happen, but like not really. They're normally like much more of
I feel like they can, and I'll give you an example. If you say a particular molecule binds to the active site or is a structural analog of a particular substrate of an enzyme, that's a competitive inhibitor.
So like
They do
again,
sometimes,
they
but
do
not as often.
sometimes, not as often, right? Like yeah, bind to active site, like yes, 100% you should think, even though they didn't say competitive inhibitor, yes, competitive inhibitor. But
It
yeah,
looks
very
different.
much they're much more likely to bring up the buzzword itself in chem and bio, whereas in psych soc, yeah, it's very much like, hey, or they like another big one is
They
ages.
illustrate.
If they give her an age range, it's like, hey, at this age they didn't do this. At this age they did this. And like, oh, you're thinking about your developmental stages, the different types of developmental stages, like the different theories already, even though they didn't say that. And I think a really thing I want to double click on is the idea of relationships as well. You know, when like protein X, you know, increase or inhibited protein Y. A lot of times I'm always very like, I'm looking for as specific a relationship as possible. Whenever I see that, you know, if it just said protein X affected translation, me personally, I don't consider that a relationship yet.
It's
Because
not.
translation's a buzzword, and I'm like, oh, translation's involved. But because it didn't tell me how it impacted translation, it didn't tell me, is it upregulating, downregulating? Because a lot of people would think, oh, it's impacting, so therefore that's relationship. Because they weren't specific about it, that's not a relationship. If they then go on and say, oh, you know, when they added it, we had a decrease in translation. Okay, so now I can say it's inhibiting translation in some way, but we want to be very specific and selective in our relationships. And this, I think, goes back to the idea that we're not writing every single sentence. Right? We have to be very selective. We see this like directional relationship. I think I always kind of think about like X leads to Y or X impacts Y in a very specific way. That's something definitely you want to jot down, note down. I also think a really good testable information as well is when you see like structures and mechanisms. Huge, especially Chem Phys Bio, where you see like I know in my personal like when I was going through this, like whenever I saw an organic chemistry molecule, heart would skip a beat. Like I see some rings, and I see some like I see some functional groups, I'd be like, oh no, oh organic chemistry. Now I kind of like it. But like whenever you see like a figure with like, oh hey, we see this structure, then after something happens, now we have this structure. Pay attention to that. This is very testable. Now they can talk about nucleophilic attacks and organic chemistry. Organic chemistry isn't a super big part of this exam. Like it's like, I mean, what's it, like 16%, if that?
It's pretty small. I think it's 12 questions out of 230.
Yeah, so like
So pretty small.
It's pretty small. But when they do come up, like you want to be very primed to think about them when they do come up, right? You see a structure, you see a molecule, like, okay, what kind of reaction are we seeing here? This is the sort of stuff that's very specific to pay attention to, not to skip over. Right? And just say like, oh, I'll deal with it later. No, pay attention to it while we're reading it.
Well, I love that. And it comes back to the two extremes. Again, we want the Goldilocks zone, but so often I see students either see a structure or a reaction pathway or something like that. And there's like, nope, not today, bye. And they don't want to look at it. If they see a question that asks about the structure, they're just like, nope, yes, I'm not doing it. And then I see students that while they're reading are like, okay, I'm gonna ignore the rest of the passage for a moment. Like, let me try and guess the enzymes. What kind of reaction is this? It could be a 10-step pathway. Like, and they're noting all the functional groups and trying to break down every step of this 10-step cascade. And they're like, do I think this is gonna be acid or base catalyzed? Blah, blah, blah. Like, that's too much.
Way too much. Right.
The beauty of structures and pathways is that it's so obvious when you get a question about them that that's what they're asking. If they're asking for properties of a molecule, if they're asking for any sort of reagent, intermediate, enzyme, anything, that would involve the reaction cascade, right? when you read a question, if you are paying attention for the passage, if it's not in the passage, it's there, right? Like
Right.
it's a very direct place to know to look back. Okay. So the beauty is it's very easy to reference later. You do not need to break down every single detail about
aspect.
it.
No.
I've seen passages, and this is not as common, but I've seen passages that they give you the cascade and you actually didn't need it. Or maybe you just needed to know the general gist of
Idea.
what was in it. Like, oh, this pathway, this big, hideous pathway is an alternative to glycolysis. They're asking me which enzyme do I not expect to be there? And the answer is a glycolysis enzyme because they don't use glycolysis. They use this mess. I didn't need the figure. Okay, so
It's funny because I know you're referring to a specific I know the exact passage that you're referring to.
I
I'm
think
like,
it's
I
a
know.
bio. I
It's
think
like
it's a bio QPAC passage.
yeah, I know
Can't
the exact.
remember.
It
It's
was like a
somewhere.
fructose alternative pathway.
Yeah,
There was
yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah.
The I want to remember the name of the pathway, but I'm Entner Doudneroff or something like that.
Oh yes,
I'm pretty sure that's what it
it's
is.
like an ED, but oh yes.
See, spreading activation.
Right,
Spreading
I'm like,
activation.
the
I said
fact you
enough
said that.
buzzwords and here it came back.
Oh my goodness.
Something like that. But again, you want to get the gist. Okay, I see that this pathway is an alternative to glycolysis. I see that I'm starting with fructose or glucose or whatever, and I see that I'm ending up with this molecule. If I get a question about this workflow, here it is.
Amazing.
Or the structures of a molecule, if you're given 3 different substrates for a particular enzyme. If you want to stop and say, oh, okay, these all have carboxylic acids or these are all negatively charged, cool. But don't sit there and agonize over them. Okay.
Right. Get what you can get some quick information, right? That's what like
Quick info is great.
I like, yeah, we don't ignore it. We just say like what's the things that you recognize? Just like what do you recognize
What
there?
jumps out at me?
Yeah, like what jumps out?
What
Like,
jumps
oh,
out at
you
me?
see like NABH4, you see like LiALH4 there. Oh, maybe a redox reaction happening. Cool. Again, don't sit there and agonize about the details. Just say, okay, there's a redox reaction happening. Great. I can figure out the details if they ask me a question about it. Oh, I see certain functional groups. I see a negative charge there. Great. Or, oh, I see some rings. Okay, maybe I'm thinking about a non-polar thing. Okay, cool. Again, what can I recognize? What can I take away? Not let me now write out the whole mechanism of how this whole thing happened.
Yeah,
So what's
exactly.
quick? What can I recognize? That's always my cue. Like, what's our recognize quick? Cool. Then you move on.
And that'll help with the questions, right? Because again, the more you process while you move through the passage, the easier you're going to be able to use that information for the questions.
Right.
Right. Again, we want this to be not a memorization, not taking 25 minutes to break down every possible word and implication of the passage. It's I'm reading it through, I'm digesting, okay, there's an important point about an amino acid mutation in this paragraph. Other than that, it's pretty topical. Okay, this next one gets into a pretty big cascade. This next one gives a couple values with units, concentration, stuff like that I might need, right? And then I get a figure. So it's getting kind of a mental map of the passage. You don't need to map it like we do in cars, like paragraph 1, we brought up this, paragraph 2, we brought up this, because we're free to go back. It's different from cars fundamentally, but you're welcome to highlight. Keep it short if you're going to highlight. Personally, I like to say 1 or 2 words, maybe 3 if they're all critical, but very rarely.
Even for me, 3 is like
I know.
3's on the line for me. It's like I'm
3
like
is a
1 or
lot.
2. Yeah.
Keep it short. I never want to see highlighting a sentence. If it's that important
write it down.
and you can't miss out on any word, you're probably able, if you needed to, if you wanted to, you could probably summarize it with your own words faster than it would take to figure out the exact word or a couple of words to highlight. If you need to, use your scratch paper. You have it. Mike showed earlier the long 8.5 by 14 spiral bound wet
For those
erase
watching
scratch
on our,
paper. Yeah.
You have this on test day.
Students always ask, what if I run out? They'll give you more. It's okay.
Yeah, right. And
don't worry about it. Use it if you want to use it. Okay. Don't feel like you need to. I don't want you to like chain yourself to it and feel like you have to write everything out. Everyone is different. Okay. But if you want it, you have it. Personally, I used it a fair amount and I just felt like it was helpful for me while I read. You know, it was easy. It kept me engaged to be using my scratch paper. But again, calculations, if there's relationships you want to jot down. I'm a big proponent about trends because they're so high yield.
Yeah,
And
trends,
as you're
especially from
going through
data
a figure,
too. Yeah.
yeah, I'll always write down, like, let's say F1 for figure 1, and then I'll say some change in my independent variable, quick, a word maybe, right? Increasing heart rate, arrow up, HR,
Yeah.
equals or leads to with an arrow, a change in my blood pressure or whatever, right? Like you'll put the trend with
Right.
the independent variable changing, leading to what change in your dependent. I'll actually write that down because I don't have to write out my research question and then my independent and dependent variable and then the trend. Because my trend, even though it's
Has
just
all
a
those.
handful of words, it has everything you need.
Right.
Again, we'll talk about
We'll
research
talk about
data
data
in a
analysis.
few
Right?
minutes,
I know,
but
you're like, I love this one I'm talking about now. And I think this is important. Like we've talked a lot about like, okay, what should we focus on? I like giving like, if anyone listening, here's some actionable things because we've talked about kind of like two main things to be doing when you're reading a science passage, which is using your scratch paper and highlighting. But I always like the way I always kind of like teach is like I'm very strict when it comes to like what you're highlighting, what you're writing down. Because a lot of people are too like when I ask about science passage strategy, like what do you choose to highlight? They're like just what looks important. And
yeah,
I'm
whatever
like,
seems important,
whatever
which
seems. I'm
often
like,
is not important.
and I'm like, how do you know? Like, how do you know what's important, not important? It's not intentional, right? I was like being extremely intentional when I highlight. So when it comes to highlighting, for me, the only two things I'm highlighting are buzzwords and equationable numbers. That's it. Like I think you said it beautifully. Like you do not highlight sentences because
Yeah.
so many times, and again, I'm always going to be referring to the listener. Yeah, you know you're out there, right? Where you've highlighted.
We're breaking the fourth wall
We're breaking the
now.
fourth wall now, where you've highlighted something in the passage and then got a question wrong because you didn't remember what you highlighted, right? You like highlighted a really, you can, because it's very easy to tell in a passage, oh, the sentence looks important. Very easy to tell. But highlighting is something I call very passive.
Yeah.
Like when you highlight something, you're not actually forced to process it. Like, what did you highlight? What does it actually mean, that relationship that you just outlined? Because when you're actually forced to summarize it in your head and put in your own words and write it, now you're actually processing it. Now you're actually thinking about it. So when there's a question about it, right, you've actually already done the work of processing it. But how many times have we seen this, Molly, where somebody's gotten a question wrong? They're like, oh my gosh, how do I know? And then it was like, oh, that was, you see that relationship that you just highlighted there? And they're
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, I forgot I highlighted that. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, I used to do this. I feel like for me, highlighting has a dual purpose of like, okay, this is helping reinforce that this is important. And also, it just kind of scratches an itch in my brain of like, I feel like I'm being active, I'm being engaged. The
Right.
problem is if we're highlighting without intention, it's scratching the itch of like, woohoo, I'm entertained or I'm engaged, I'm doing so good, but you're not actually pulling anything valuable out of it.
Yeah.
So things like that happen where you have something important highlighted, but because just the active highlighting gave you that boost of I'm doing well, you lost out on the actual value of the read, right? So
Yeah.
you read with the intention to understand and to track new information as it's brought up in the passage. Sometimes, again, if it's a buzzword, okay, cool, short and sweet. They're talking about the liver. Great. You could highlight the word liver.
Primed, yeah.
But if it's a complex relationship, try and put it on paper shorter. It's actually your point that you made is incredibly critical with cars. That's why we don't highlight in cars. That's why we don't go back to the passage. We'll talk about car strategy another time. And in fact, check out our other episodes. Jack and I do a
Cars
podcast.
Yeah.
Weekly Cars Reading Skills Workshop. We'll talk about that. But yeah, you don't want to steal your own processing capacity. And sometimes we do that. And again, what this is going to look like in each section is very different. How much you're going to be jotting down versus highlighting, what you're going to be jotting down versus highlighting. All of those things are going to look very different among the different sections of the MCAT. And of course, today we're focused all on science and the basics of read slowly. We want to be processing. We want to be using our scratch paper and using our highlight tool. We're going to actually cover each one of our science sections in its own unique episode over the next couple weeks. We'll do an episode exclusively on how to read a Chem Phys passage, and then one in Biochem and one in Psych because ultimately they're all slightly different permutations of these core fundamental principles.
Right. And I think it's cool, like, to look at those permutations, like, yeah, same fundamental principle, focusing on the buzzwords and equationable numbers, but how they present themselves in each section is like a little bit different. So we want to be aware of those differences while we're reading them, kind of shift our mind, gear our mind to how what we're about to read, but it's the same fundamental principles where you're not highlighting whole sentences, you're focusing on buzzwords, you're focusing on numbers with units. But again, especially numbers with units, I think is like a big one. In some of the sections, I think is really, really good. So highlight numbers with units, buzzwords, relationships, we are writing down.
Yeah.
Jotting quick, like as like kind of like cars, if you're familiar with car strategy, in that same way, you're not writing whole sentences, you're using arrows, drawing pictures. Like again, I am I kind of say this, and this is maybe a little bit extreme, but I always kind of say this where if I'm reading your notes, I should not be able to understand your notes.
Yeah, you
Like,
don't need to.
I don't need to
You don't
understand
even
your
have
notes.
to understand your own 10
Right.
minutes later.
Right, 10 minutes later, yeah, 10 minutes
You
you're done
just
with
have
it.
to understand it in the moment.
In the moment, like as long as like for the rest of this passage, like if it's so illegible, like you don't even like you look 2 minutes later, you look and you're like, what did I just write? That's a problem. But like as long as like it's quick, it's like supposed to be quick, not for somebody else. I don't want to see full sentences, arrows, X's, like inhibits. I always draw like an X between the arrow, like oh, it's stopping that. Use your own way, but it should be quick. Another thing
Yes.
to use the scratch paper though for is calculations, and again, we'll talk about that like when it comes to special questions.
MCAT math. We'll talk about
MCAT
that
math,
later.
don't get me started. Because like I was
We
always
will both get up on our high or not high horse,
I
but
mean
get up on our
I feel so strongly about this.
soapbox. There we go.
Soapbox, right? Oh, I like that. Where MCAT math was something I personally struggled with. Not because I was ever poor at math. I was actually pretty strong at math and kind of going through. I took math in undergrad, even though I didn't need to because I just thought it was really cool. I took like physics. I'd always loved physics. I even tutored physics before I even did any MCAT things. But I was so confident in math that I would just do it in my head. I can't tell you the amount of questions I've gotten wrong over even after I took my actual like even now sometimes I fall into the trap again where I do math in my head and make mistakes because I'm just so like oh I can just do this in my head and I drop a negative, I drop an exponent, I do something because my head, my brain, if I've got something, all this stuff going on in a passage and in this question, it's not gonna be able to process calculations on your paper. I don't care how simple it is. If it's 2 plus 5, great, it'll take 3 seconds to write down, right? If it's 2 times 8, right? Write it. Like I'm that extreme about it because if it's something you feel like you could do in your head, it'll take 2 seconds to write. If it's something you feel like it's going to take a long time to write, we shouldn't be doing it in our head in the first place.
Yeah. And I think, and this is something that's more beneficial for practice than like, you don't necessarily need to do this for full length, but when you are doing a practice question, make sure you're showing your work of what you're doing, because if you do something in your head and you get it wrong and you look at the solution, you have no idea where you went wrong. You don't know what you did that was incorrect. You might have done everything correct except you lost a negative sign or lost an exponent or whatever. Like you could have gotten it right, but also you could have used the wrong equation. You have no, like you have nothing to show for what you were actually thinking when you did that problem. So write out your steps. That being said, Mike presented kind of one extreme of like, I was really strong in math. I had a lot of background in math. I was really good at it. I was even so good at it that I'm going to do it all in my head. Nerd.
Yeah, I love
She
math.
says
But
with
again,
love.
that worked against me. But then I know there's
Yes, that's
another
one extreme.
Yeah.
The other extreme that I want to hit on that may resonate with some of us as well is I am really scared of math. Math intimidates me so much. I feel like I need to show every step. I feel like I can never round. I feel like I need to be so careful. And that extra stress and the extra fear leads you to do the same thing. Drop a negative sign, drop an exponent. Maybe we go off and we're doing like long division and we accidentally, in the heat of the moment, move a decimal point or something. Like we need to find, again, that Goldilocks zone in the middle. That's going to be our MCAT math episode. How do we figure out how to do math effectively, but also shave off time and improve your confidence? Okay, there are ways to do that, and we will be talking about it over the next couple episodes. So stay tuned for that, but that's very important. Use it for your calculations. And also, again, as we will talk about, calculate in an intentional way. You are picking between 4 options. You do not need to show every step, and you do not need to have the correct answer within
at the very
5
end.
significant figures, right?
Oh, significant. Like
you don't
where
get a
people
calculator, by the way. This is
yeah,
implied, but
and
in
so
case anyone didn't know that.
and it was actually embarrassingly long like in my prep until I knew that. Like I think I studied for like 3 or 4 weeks, like in my own prep, until I found out like I wasn't allowed a calculator, and I was like, "What do you mean? What are all these calculations?" Right?
So learn from Mike. Do your homework before you start.
Don't make my mistake. Do not make my mistake. You are not allowed a calculator. But I actually find that a very comforting thought because
I know, me too.
that means there's always a way. There's always a way to do it
And the
without a
numbers are
calculator.
pretty round and easy for the most part.
For the most part. And
can
then
be
if
tweaked a little bit to
they're
be round and
not,
easy.
if they're not round and easy, again, people like are scared of that. But that presents 2 options to me. It's either one, I can just round the number. Or two, there's something I can simplify here that
Yes.
oh, we'll make this really nice and easy.
Mhm.
And so again, yeah, we'll have a whole MCAT math talking about it, but again, when it comes to calculations, again, when we're talking about what goes on the paper, calculations should, but don't always feel like, oh yeah, all my numbers have decimals in them, that you have to get an answer with decimals at the end. Like sometimes
Yeah.
you just get in the ballpark, hint, hint.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then
And
yes, I'm sorry.
oh, I was just going to say the other thing that should end up on your scratch paper is what you understand about figures.
Right.
Which kind of leads us to our last segment of today,
Kind of like
right?
I think a very important one because
Yeah,
again, this is one that
critical.
that people skip all the time. And again, we
Mhm.
already kind of talked about it, but it's something that they're like, oh, I don't need this right now because this is not going to help me in the questions what I'm about to see. And that comes with data interpretation, right? So while you're reading the passage, you're writing down your trends, your relationships, you're hiding the buzzwords and equationable numbers. But when we get to a figure, all the time, and this is what I experience myself and a lot of people do, well, you look at a figure and get immediately overwhelmed. You're like, what am I looking at? Like there are lines going everywhere, some going up, some going down. There's all these boxes, there are a bunch of different graphs, there's a bunch of different bars, and I'm like, what am I even looking at? I get so overwhelmed, we shut down, we skip over. Right? That's like the mental process that I used to go through myself. And I was like, how
Mhm.
am I supposed to go through this? And usually it's just a matter of like giving structure to the process. Right?
Yeah,
I think if we have a guideline, which we're about to present, follow this guideline when you read data, and data actually becomes not that bad at all.
I love it.
I love like in
I'm
my mind, I'm thinking like, wow, data is so much more engaging than words. Like I can
yeah.
actually see the data, and I think it's really cool. Like experiments are really cool. Like if you understand what the experiment that they're doing, you understood like what they were talking about before. Oh, the data just makes sense. And it kind of tells a story in its own. And so
Yeah.
let's talk about like some do's and don'ts when it comes to data. Like let's talk about mindset stuff. I mean, I think
Mhm.
the big don't, right, that you shouldn't do with data is kind of what we talked about already, where you shouldn't feel like you have to interpret every single point and every single detail about the data, right? A lot of times we get so sucked into the data. We're like, okay, I need to figure out every single data point. Okay, is this significant? This not significant? Like to the T, right? Where a lot of times it's not really like the fine details aren't what's important, right? It's usually big picture that's really, really important when it comes to data. What are they trying to, what's their goal? What are they representing when it comes to data interpretation? We have kind of a structure here at JW that we like to call TAUT. TAUT, I've heard, taught, I've heard, I would say taught.
Oh, it's
Right?
taught because I taught it
Yeah,
to you.
yeah, taught because you get taught it, yes.
There you
I
go.
heard,
There you
I
go.
remember like someone called it tout a long time ago, and I was like, what? It's taught. It's taught. It's taught.
I think that's
Uh,
a different spelling to tout
tout.
something.
T. I know. I don't think T. It's
It doesn't
T.
matter.
It,
TAUT,
it's a
taught. It's not
mnemonic. It's a
actually.
mnemonic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the
Title,
mnemonic.
axes, units, trends.
Right. That's the mnemonic. So I'll go slower for the mnemonic for those listening. So taught is TAUT, and this is the mnemonic. The steps that we use to interpret data. First step, always is to read the title. T. Right. And this is one that I was guilty of this one, where I would always skip the title. Always skip the title. And so often I would make these mistakes because there was some really critical information in the title. A lot of times, like, you know, when they say like a note, like note
Yep.
colon, oh my goodness, the amount of mistakes I made when I was first prepping because I would just miss the note. Like, oh, hey, note, this is something we did. Hey, we kept all the concentrations the same. Or note, this is what we said was significant or something along those lines. A lot of people just jump to the trends and they never saw that title. So they're like, oh, I saw the trend and I move on, but they miss some very important nuance with the title, with the graph.
Yeah.
So first step always, before you even look at the trends or anything like that, read your title. What does
Yeah.
it say?
And people don't like it because they're like, well, sometimes there's no new info. At the very least, what it's going to tell you is a restatement of your variables. And
Great.
they probably introduced the variables and the goal of the experiment in the passage, but the figure title is going to give you a very, very good description like, it's a bar graph explaining the relationship or the impact of this on this. Independent
Cool.
on dependent. That there you go. There's your variables. Like
Right.
it refreshes your mind about what you've read and what you should understand about the research design. So
Hmm.
like at the very least, even if it's nothing new, it
Hmm.
just gave you a nice condensed
Hmm.
phrase that will help you interpret the figure, right?
Right.
And of course, a lot of the times there is new information, and that is where they will tell you about statistical significance if it's there.
Hmm.
And statistical significance is critical when we're
Critical.
talking trends. We're not there yet, but if you see like asterisk means that p-value is less than 0.05, which is everywhere, know that what that means is a p-value is the probability that whatever relationship you see is due to chance.
Yeah.
If
And not to just something
p-value,
actual. Yeah.
yeah, if p-value is less than 0.05, we're saying the fact that this bar is higher than this one, we are basically 95% sure that there's something different going on between these two, that it's not just like an error in measurement or something.
Yeah.
0.05 is the probability, right? So it'd be 5%.
5%.
0.05, yeah, that it's due to chance. And the rest of that is the idea that something special is going on. So having a small p-value means you have more confidence in that relationship. And if you have, let's say you have a bar chart. So you have all the horizontal bars at different heights, all the vertical bars at different heights that are showing some value of a dependent variable. If one of them has a star and none of the other ones do, and it tells you star means p-value is less than 0.05 compared to the control, that is the only data point that matters.
That's significant. That is significant.
Yeah, if one bar has a star and the other ones don't, you can infer that the others are not significant.
Right.
If they give you a star and they tell you what that means, that means statistical significance, only the things that have the stars are significant. And again, when we talk about what is true of the figure, it has to be something that's significant.
Right, right. Or
So that's important.
And so I'm always like always a skeptic when it comes to like how they can ask questions, because just because things are not significant, like that means the changes were not significant. Doesn't mean they can't ask questions. They could say like, oh, did protein Y cause a change? You'd be like, no, it didn't.
No,
Because it was significant. So like the star is the only one that had a significant change, that independent variable that we added actually did something, right? Everything else without a star, that means even the bar might look different than the control. If it doesn't have that star, that means the change was probably due to luck. That wasn't actually something that was significant. So therefore, you can infer no change, right? If it's not significant, you say, oh, I am not confident enough that that change was significant. Therefore, I assume the null hypothesis, which is that there was no change.
One specific thing that I do want to mention, though, again, we're still in title of TAUT, which is where you'll see the note about statistical significance. If there is no indication of statistical significance at all, there's no p-values, there's no stars, there's no note, and you see differences in the bars, or if you see the line in the line graph that, one is way higher than the others, or a table, one number is way bigger or smaller than the other. If you're not given anything about p-values or asterisks or any symbols that they're using, no clues about significance, you just have to go with your gut. Okay. You're just using your reasoning. Okay. But so you can't, unless they tell you it's significant, you can't tell, right? You just answer based on what the bars look like or what the lines look like or the numbers. But if they tell you significance is there, you now get to laser focus on this is the one data point that had something significant happen. The others didn't. And like you said, they could still show up in the answers or in the questions, but they're not representing an important change.
Right.
And that's a really key thing. A lot of students miss those questions for that reason.
For that reason. Right. Like that star. But I mean, I think we kind of even got, like, we're talking about the trends now. I'm like, okay, let's pull it back to A and U. Because we just talked about the title, right? Like when it comes to like, what's the p-value? What's that note? What? And again, that I think you put it really well. Even just like seeing a refresher of the data is also a really good feeling, like, okay, I am with the data so far. I understand this passage. Seeing the title again and seeing it, oh, that's just a restatement, is a good feeling. Like, okay, I'm there. I'm with it. We're
Improves
ready.
your confidence.
Right. Then we go to A and U. And this is a personal thing, I like combining these two steps
Yeah,
because
I
they're
always
looking in the
combine them
same
too.
place. Yeah. So A stands for the axes and the units. Because say you've got a bar chart or even a line graph, you will have axes, an x-axis and a y-axis. And while this isn't always a rule, it's a general trend where the x-axis generally has your independent variable. For context, the independent variable is what you're manipulating, what you as the experimenter or the experimenters are changing. And then the dependent variable is on the y-axis, or that vertical axis, which is what are we measuring. So look at your axes, and I kind of think the axis step is my independent dependent variable step, where what am I changing and what are we measuring? Look at your axes, and actually, like, you don't, and and again, some people like to write them down. And when you're starting out, maybe that's a good thing to write them down just when you're starting. But I just like to mentally note them down. Like, oh, I like taking a mental note. Okay, we're changing concentration, we're measuring cell viability, right? Like
Mhm.
I explicitly say that in my mind. Like I
Yeah.
identify that. And if
Yeah.
during the axis step, I also like asking, what are
Mhm.
other independent variables? Like what are
Oh yeah.
what are like if there's
A
like a little
legend.
box, if there's like a
Yeah.
legend, I also put that in my axis step because it's my independent dependent variable step where it's like, oh, if there's another thing that we're changing, what else are we doing that?
Hmm.
While I'm looking at my axes, while I'm looking at them, I'm also doing the U step of TAUT, which I
Hmm.
think, and this is my opinion, I think this is most important in Chem Phys. I think this is where it
Yeah.
comes up the most is units. Oh
Hmm.
my goodness. Again, for my math people out there, again, this one got, well, anything math, it got me. Where the units, I would overlook units all the time. I would assume molar when in reality the data said micromolar or nanomolar or megamolar or yeah or it was in like kilograms and the answers were in grams or something like that. I overlooked the units and that's why I made the mistake. So while you're looking at axes, right, dependent, independent variable, take a look at your units to make sure that, okay, clock them. If you see standard units, like you see a molar or you see a meters and it's pretty standard, okay, cool. But as soon as you see a kind of a non-SI unit, that's when red flags. And by SI is like that standard unit, red flag should be going off. Take note of that. No, you don't have to actually take a note, but take note of that. So if something comes up, you've already sort of primed your mind to think, I need to make sure I take that into account.
Yes.
Hmm.
And so what I like to think about, right, because ultimately our main goal with any research, uh, figure that we're analyzing, our ultimate goal is to get to the final T, which is the
Hmm.
trends. Okay,
Hmm.
because that is the most common thing to get questions about. But what we've
Hmm.
essentially done with TAU
Hmm.
is we've understood what information is here. I don't
Hmm.
know specifically what the relationship is, but I do know that if I get a question that asks me about the independent or dependent variable, I know that it's here. Okay, at the very least, even for those of us out there that are like, Molly, Mike, you know what? I'm not doing this. I'm not
Right.
doing this. I'm not
Not doing
gonna
TA
sit
and
here and do the
you.
trends. It takes me too long. If we have any students that are like, no, at the very least, please, TAU. Okay, because
Hmm.
at least that, like you said earlier, you had the student who sees a question and they're like, how is I supposed to know that it's from the figure? Because they didn't say figure two. If you at least do TAU,
Hmm.
you may not have enough information to get the answer, but you'll at least know that it's asking about that figure. Okay, so
Right.
TAU tells you the general information, like
Hmm.
what information is there. The trends, though, really is what accounts for most of the
Hmm.
points. So
Right.
again, with trends, we're thinking immediately I'm ready to look at the data points. I know
Hmm.
what's represented in my figure. I know what the axes are. I know what the shaded versus the unshaded boxes or the triangles and the squares and the circles. I know what
Hmm.
these things mean.
Hmm.
Now it's time to see changes. Do I have
Hmm.
a control lane? If so, am I
Hmm.
comparing everything to the control? Do I have statistical significance represented? If
Hmm.
so, focus on the bars or the lines that have stars or the
Hmm.
values if it's a table, right? You're basically going in and asking yourself, how did changing the dependent variable impact, or sorry, my independent
Yeah.
variable impact my dependent variable?
Hmm.
And again, with the trends, and this is going to take practice, the best thing that you can do for yourself when it comes to the questions is jot down something like figure one,
Hmm.
let's say increasing the concentration of a particular drug. So increasing like an up arrow concentration of compound A led to, with an
Arrow.
equal
Yeah.
sign or an arrow, a decrease in cell viability. If you have F1 increase concentration of A leads to decreased cell viability, you're going to get the answer right. Like
Very likely. It's so much
it's
easier,
so much
right?
easier in the moment than
Hmm.
to come back to it later and stare at this figure that now it's been a minute or two since you've been primed with TAU. If you can get the trend, do it right there and jot it
Right.
down.
Right. Yeah.
Best
Again,
case scenario.
and again, a lot of the times you see these like upwards bar, you're increasing, and it's very obvious. And a lot of times we just mentally clock it. But no, sometimes even just writing that little piece there is so important. I also want to kind of speak to like there are some times where a trend is not immediately obvious. Like especially with those like big tables, where you have whole bunch of like columns
Yeah.
and a whole bunch of rows, and you're like overwhelmed with numbers. TAU you don't see a clear
Helps you so
trend.
much.
Yeah, TAU, just so you know what the things are. And then like you don't see a clear trend, don't sit there and stare
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
numbers. Like we kind of usually this is like a fifth step to TAUT. It's like TAUT, then move on. Don't sit here like and trying to figure out, especially with those big tables, like, oh my gosh, what are all the numbers? If there's
Yeah.
anything that stands out, like I usually like thinking of extremes. Like if I see any extreme numbers, like a number that's
Mhm.
really out there or a row that's really out there compared to the other ones, that might be something I clock as a trend. But again, this takes like if the trend doesn't jump at you, like my threshold is like 5 to 10 seconds. If there's not a trend that really jumps out at you, just move on.
I like that.
TAU, 5 to 10 seconds, no trend, move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially because, like we said, TAU gets you enough information to figure out that a question is asking about that figure. So
Mhm.
let's say, like you said, you have this big, horrible table that's got
Right.
600 data points, whatever,
Mhm.
right? If you can at least realize that the question is asking you about a data or
Mhm.
a data trend from here, you have
Mhm.
4 statements that you're basically proving true or false with your data.
Right.
This says it's significant, data says no. That was a
Gone.
quick verification. I didn't need to look at every data point for that.
Mhm.
I didn't need to synthesize a trend in that case. It's a reference table.
Mhm.
Nope, this is not significant. I check. Yeah, actually it's not significant. Cool.
Mhm.
There's my answer. I'm done. Right? Even if you have to go through and all 4 of them essentially are true or false statements about the data, even if
Mhm.
the correct answer is D and you have to prove each of the 3 false, it's still faster
Mhm.
to go through it that way than
Mhm.
to try and analyze, especially tables.
Yeah,
It's
tables like with
it's
all those
way more
points.
often tables than any other type.
Yeah, yeah, where
Um,
they've just like a whole bunch of things, and then but again, a student I see that a lot of times I see students take TAUT too far, like the trend. They're like, I need a trend, I need to figure out like the T. It's like, okay, dude, 5 to 10, like that's the threshold I found, like 5 to 10 seconds. You still don't see each other. Like again, sometimes you see like, okay, it's going up. That's your
yeah,
trend. If you don't, move on. And then guess what? A lot of times questions even prime you, even know what to look for. Because sometimes tables don't prime you like, okay, where am I supposed to look? But with these answer options, they're like, hey, this point here, when we added this drug to the liver, here's the, did it cause a change in the amount of bilirubin? I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, so now I know what to look at. So TAUT if you can in 5 to 10 seconds, then move on. You follow that
Yes.
structure. I can't think of a single piece of data that this has not worked for.
No, it
But
does.
again, just following this structure, I think goes miles, especially if you're somebody that previously didn't look at the figures like at all, right? I think this is gonna be
Yeah.
huge.
It
Yeah.
makes a world of difference. And I know that this is one of the most common things that students say they struggle
Mhm.
with the most is data
Mhm.
interpretation.
Mhm.
Math is a good one too, even just reading
Mhm.
comprehension.
Sure.
I do want to do a little shout out for our Chrome extension. If you
Absolutely.
are
Mhm.
interested,
Mhm.
it's available for free. We have a AMC MCAT Chrome extension. This is not a new product, but we did just revamp it basically.
Mhm.
We have a bunch of written solutions for all the AMC materials, their exams, their section banks, their question
Mhm.
packs. We have a lot of extra information added to help you learn from each question. And
Mhm.
we also have a bunch of video solutions. So
Mhm.
if you are someone who knows that you need data interpretation help, or you really struggle with finding the shortcuts in math, the videos will walk you through. And we have our expert instructors that go through the
Mhm.
entire passage start to finish or the questions. They're actually divided up that way. So if you just want to see the question, you don't need the passage, you can do that. And if you watch the question, you're like, wait a minute, I think I misunderstood the passage, you can go to that video
Oh,
separately.
right.
But they're absolutely amazing. We had a lot of fun filming them.
Oh my God.
They're
Yeah, you'll see both Molly and I in those.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
And the goal is to be pretty to the point, right?
Mhm.
Rather than having a, 2 or 3 hour lesson that you have to skip through. They're recorded just me and Mike or me or
Another
Mike
one of our
and
amazing
our camera
instructors.
and our
Yeah.
AMC website. So
Right.
they're very concise, they're to the point, and we really do try and emphasize all of these strategies. So
Mhm.
if you're interested, and especially if you're gearing up to test day, but even if you're not and you want to just start looking at and engaging with AMC
Mhm.
materials, highly recommend the Chrome extension.
Mhm.
It's on the Chrome web store, so
Right,
it's
right. And
free
you
to
can even
download to get the written solutions if you're
right.
interested.
And yeah, and even just for the written, I think those written solutions, I think are a must for so many
They
students.
are
They are. I think this is,
no
and again,
shade, but they're
totally,
needed.
totally free. And I think again, not to throw any shade at the AMC, but again, our experts have kind of really kind of expanded on the thought process that the AMC is going for to really make sure that every student understands what the question was getting at so that you can learn. Because again, review, that intentional review and learning from both our correct answers and our incorrect answer options, I think just elevates the review every single year. The students that do the best, I would say, are the ones that review the best. Having a tool like that, again, like I said, the written solution is totally free. I think is a must for every student.
I think so too. And you can't beat free, right? And of course, if you want more practice, we have an amazing Q bank that's got like more than 7,000 questions.
Yeah, I think we just crossed 7,000 recently, 7 questions.
So many. We've got cars, we've got science, we've got passages and discretes, we've got flashcard programs. Obviously, we have podcasts, but we also have blogs. We've got you name it. We've got so many different resources to help students with whatever they may need. We even have academic advisors where if you're like, I need help, but I don't know what kind of help I need. We even have people that are here to help coach you through whatever you might need as an individual, right? If you need our help, basically.
We're here. We are here.
Our why is to be here for you and to help you achieve your dreams, whatever that might look like. Please let us know how we can be of assistance to you.
And speaking of some things that we can assist, a very new and exciting thing that I think everybody is going to be interested in is dropping very, very soon. So keep an eye out on the website sometime next week. Keep an eye out on our page. We're going to be having a special release event, and just more information to come. So take a look out for that. We've got some very exciting news that I think a lot of students are going to be really. I mean, the last time we had a special event like this, we released our completely free textbooks. So I think it's just awesome. People should be there if you're listening. Keep an eye out. More information to come.
Yes, we're all about breaking down barriers that might be, preventing really highly qualified, highly educated, and highly motivated students from reaching their dreams of becoming a physician. And this I think is a pretty big,
huge step,
game changer, ground shaker announcement. So stay tuned. We are going to have a special event sometime next week. So if you are curious or you want to stay in the loop, if you go to jackweston.com, you can see our schedule of free events. While you're there, come see us in cars or in science or in admissions, right? We do free sessions every week that are live that you can interact with the instructor, but definitely check out that special event. More news to come. Stay excited. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed our review of how to read a science passage, how to analyze data, all of those amazing things. And we hope that you're excited for our next episode as well.
I mean, because we're doing this thing where we're not just going to do just strategy. Strategy is fundamental, but we can't neglect those foundations and content. Those kind of, again, the necessary, not sufficient, but necessary. I love how you put that. Necessary content.
So sciencey.
And I think we chose a kind of a topic that I think is MCAT pertinent. Very MCAT pertinent, but also very relevant just for the stages of life that we're in our studying period, which is all about memory and encoding. We're going to be talking about all MCAT memory and coding, but also what's amazing is it's very relevant for everyone listening right now. You can use, I quote Psych stuff all the time to my students. It's
so relevant to just being a human.
Sometimes we are always we look at the content, we're like, okay, this is the stuff that I'm just studying, but we have to realize this is stuff that you can use. A lot of these principles you can actually use to maximize your own studying of that content. So next episode, we are diving in to memory and encoding on the MCAT, and even maybe we'll be bringing some things how you can use these principles to maximize your own memory encoding when studying for the MCAT. So I think it's got that dual purpose there. So I'm excited. Molly's excited. You should get excited because it's going to be an awesome episode.
Yes. Thank you guys for listening, and we can't wait to catch you in the next one. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Welcome to the Jack Weston MCAT podcast with your hosts, Michael Maleka
and Molly Hudash.